Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, nestled among the usual flurry of meeting requests and project updates. An exclusive weekend on Paradise Island, the subject line read. My wife Lucy and I both worked for the same marketing firm, and while I typically dismissed corporate social events, this one caught my attention. The sender was Jack Edwards, our CEO, and the recipient list included only senior directors, their partners, and a few key employees. The trip was to be hosted by William Fellows, our firm's wealthiest client. The invitation outlined a weekend of luxury, a private island, chartered flights, fine dining, and activities designed to impress. It was, Jack explained, an opportunity to build rapport with William, who could become the firm's biggest client. Both Lucy and I had made the cut. She'd been the account's point of contact for months, and I assumed my role as head of IT meant they'd need someone to crunch data or manage presentations. When I mentioned the trip over dinner, Lucy's face lit up. "Oh, I know about this," she said, almost too quickly. "William's been talking about it for weeks. It's going to be incredible." Her excitement was contagious, though something about her tone gave me pause. "What's he like?" I asked. Lucy leaned back in her chair, twirling a strand of her long blonde hair. "Charming. Confident. He's one of those people who commands attention without trying. Kind of like George Clooney, if you can imagine." She laughed lightly, but I noticed the faintest blush coloring her cheeks. "Sounds interesting," I said, masking my unease. "Let's hope he's as generous as he seems." The weeks leading up to the trip were a whirlwind. Lucy, always the planner, spent hours selecting the perfect outfits, breezy summer dresses, chic evening wear, and bikinis that left little to the imagination. She seemed more invested in this getaway than any trip we'd taken together in years. On Friday morning, we boarded a private jet alongside a handful of colleagues and their partners. The plane was opulent, with plush leather seats and a champagne service that started before takeoff. Lucy was seated beside me, but her eyes sparkled as she chatted with others about the weekend ahead. I tried to match her enthusiasm, but the more I watched her, the more I felt like an outsider. She seemed more alive, more animated than usual. When we landed on the island, the scenery took my breath away. White sandy beaches stretched for miles, framed by turquoise waters and swaying palm trees. The main villa, perched atop a hill, was a masterpiece of modern design, with glass walls offering panoramic views of the ocean. William was waiting for us on the veranda, his tailored linen suit unwrinkled despite the humid air. He greeted each of us warmly, though his handshake lingered a little too long when it came to Lucy. "Welcome," he said, flashing a smile that could sell anything. "Please, consider this island your home for the weekend." As we were shown to our rooms, I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly William commanded the space. The staff moved at his slightest gesture, and the guests hung on his every word. Lucy, too, seemed enraptured. That evening, as we dined on fresh seafood under a canopy of stars, I felt a growing unease. William and Lucy sat across from me, their conversation flowing with an ease that felt too practiced. I tried to focus on the other guests, but my attention kept drifting back to them. William's hand brushed Lucy's once, twice, and each time she didn't pull away. She laughed at his jokes, leaning in closer than necessary. My stomach churned, though I couldn't pinpoint why. After all, they were just talking. When the meal ended, the group dispersed to explore the villa or enjoy a nightcap. I suggested a stroll along the beach, but Lucy declined. "You go ahead," she said. "I want to get to know the others a bit more." Her words stung, but I forced a smile. "Sure. Don't stay up too late." I wandered the shoreline alone, the waves lapping at my feet. The night was beautiful, but my thoughts were heavy. Was I imagining things? Overreacting? Lucy and I had always trusted each other, but something about her demeanor tonight felt different. Distant. When I returned to our room, she was already in bed, scrolling through her phone. "Good walk?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah," I said, stripping off my shirt and climbing in beside her. "Ready for tomorrow?" "Of course." She kissed my cheek absently before turning off the light. "Good night." The next day was packed with activities, snorkeling, kayaking, and lounging by the pool. The guests mingled, and I did my best to fit in. But William and Lucy were inseparable. They shared private jokes, exchanged knowing glances, and seemed to gravitate toward each other in every setting. My attempts to join their conversations felt clumsy, unwelcome. That evening, during cocktails on the terrace, William approached me. "Mark," he said, his tone friendly but measured. "Can I have a word?" "Of course," I replied, masking my unease. He led me to a quieter corner, away from the others. "I wanted to thank you for coming this weekend," he began. "It's clear you're an important part of the team." "Thanks," I said, unsure where this was going. He smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "I also wanted to talk about Lucy. She's extraordinary. You're a lucky man." My throat tightened. "She's amazing," I managed to say. William leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I'd like to propose something. It's unconventional, but hear me out." I nodded cautiously, my heart pounding. "I'd like to spend the rest of the weekend with Lucy," he said, his tone calm, almost businesslike. "In exchange, I'll transfer $100,000 into your account. Consider it compensation for your understanding." For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. The audacity, the arrogance, it was almost laughable. But as the anger bubbled up inside me, a plan began to take shape. I forced a smile, keeping my voice steady. "I'll think about it," I said. William nodded, his confidence unshaken. "Take your time. Let me know tomorrow." As I returned to the group, Lucy looked up from her conversation with a questioning glance. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Perfect," I said, my smile tight. "Just perfect." Inside, though, I was anything but calm. The man had crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let it go unanswered. The night after William's audacious proposition was one of restless tossing and turning. Lucy, oblivious, slept soundly beside me, her golden hair spilling over the pillow. I stared at the ceiling, thoughts racing. $100,000 for a weekend. The idea made my stomach churn, not because of the money, but because of the man's audacity, and Lucy's seemingly complicit behavior. I needed answers, but I couldn't afford to react emotionally. If there was more to this than William's charm and arrogance, I had to handle it carefully. Confronting Lucy now would only alert her, and I wasn't ready for whatever truth might come spilling out. By morning, I had resolved to play along. To William, I would appear willing. To Lucy, I would act as though nothing had changed. The key, I realized, was timing. The next day dawned bright and warm, the kind of weather you'd expect in paradise. Lucy was already up, chatting animatedly with a few of the other guests over breakfast on the veranda. She looked radiant in a sundress, her laughter carrying on the breeze. My heart sank as I saw her turn to William, who was, as always, positioned strategically within her orbit. I took a seat at the far end of the table, grabbing a plate of tropical fruit and pastries. I listened quietly to the conversation, pretending to be engrossed in my food. The others were discussing plans for the day, some wanted to snorkel, others to explore the island on kayaks. William, of course, suggested a leisurely hike through the private trails he'd had landscaped to perfection. "Lucy, you must join me," he said with a dazzling smile. "It's absolutely breathtaking. I'd love to show you the hidden waterfall." Lucy hesitated, glancing at me briefly before responding. "That sounds amazing. Mark, do you want to come too?" It was a moment of unexpected hesitation, as if she were testing me. I forced a smile, shaking my head. No, you two go ahead. I think I'll check out the kayaking. She nodded, her smile almost too casual. Okay, if you're sure. William clapped his hands. Perfect. We'll leave in 30 minutes. I watched them walk off together later, her laughter ringing out as William gestured animatedly. My chest tightened, but I swallowed the bitter taste of jealousy and focused on my own plan. While they were gone, I needed to get to the bottom of this. The villa was mostly empty, the other guests scattered across the island's attractions. I made my way to the staff quarters under the guise of looking for the kitchen. There, I struck up a conversation with one of the housekeepers, a middle-aged woman named Marta. This place is incredible, I said, trying to sound casual. How long have you worked for William? Marta hesitated, glancing around before responding. A few years. He's generous, but demanding. I nodded, leaning in slightly. What about the guests? He seems to know some of them well. Marta's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Yes. Some are regular visitors. He entertains often. I didn't press her further but tucked the information away. It confirmed what I suspected, this wasn't William's first time hosting such an event. By the time Lucy and William returned, the sun was high in the sky, and the group was gathering for lunch. Lucy's cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly damp from what I assumed was the waterfall. She avoided my gaze as she took her seat beside me. How was the hike? I asked, keeping my tone light. Amazing, she replied, her voice a little too enthusiastic. The waterfall was stunning. You'd have loved it. I smiled faintly. Maybe next time. Throughout lunch, William's gaze lingered on Lucy. She seemed to notice but didn't shy away. Every laugh, every shared glance, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I forced myself to stay composed, even as my suspicions solidified. That afternoon, while the others napped or lounged by the pool, I sought out William. I found him in his office, a sprawling room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. He was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, sipping what looked like an expensive whiskey. Mark, he greeted me warmly, setting down his glass. Come in. I closed the door behind me, taking a seat opposite him. I've thought about your offer. William leaned back in his chair, his expression one of smug satisfaction. And? I'm willing to agree, I said, keeping my voice steady. But I have conditions. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Conditions? I nodded. First, the money has to be transferred up front. No games. Of course, he said smoothly. That's only fair. And the second? I hesitated, then leaned in. Lucy can't know about our arrangement. As far as she's concerned, this is her decision. William studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. I respect that. You're a man of principle, Mark. Principle, I thought bitterly. Right. This was about survival now, about uncovering the truth and protecting what was left of my dignity. I'll transfer the funds immediately, William continued, pulling out his phone. A few taps later, he turned the screen toward me, showing a confirmation of the transfer. Done. The notification buzzed on my phone a moment later. $100,000. The number stared back at me, surreal and almost comical. I thanked him and left the office, my heart pounding. That evening, the group gathered for cocktails by the pool. The atmosphere was lively, but I felt like an actor in a play, every smile and laugh carefully rehearsed. Lucy seemed unusually quiet, her gaze flitting between me and William. At one point, she pulled me aside. Mark, is everything okay? She asked, her brow furrowed. Of course, I said, forcing a smile. Why wouldn't it be? She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't know. You just seem distant. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. It's been a lot to take in, that's all. This trip, the clients, everything. She nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. Okay. Just, don't shut me out, okay? I won't, I promised, though my mind was already elsewhere. Tomorrow, I would set everything in motion. As the evening wore on, I watched Lucy and William carefully, noting every shared glance and hushed conversation. By the time we returned to our room, I was exhausted, but my resolve was stronger than ever. The trap was set. Now, it was only a matter of time. Sunday morning dawned with the promise of yet another day in paradise, but for me, it was the calm before the storm. By now, William's money was securely in my account, and my plan had taken shape. It was no longer a question of if I would act, it was a matter of when. Lucy had been unusually quiet the night before, her unease palpable. Whether she suspected something or was grappling with her own guilt, I couldn't tell. But her distracted glances at breakfast told me she wasn't as carefree as she pretended to be. As the group discussed plans for the day, William once again took the lead, suggesting a sailing excursion around the island. The yacht is stocked with everything we'll need, he announced. Food, drinks, music. It'll be the perfect way to end the weekend. Everyone agreed enthusiastically, including Lucy. She glanced at me as if seeking approval. I smiled faintly. Sounds great, I said. Inside, my resolve hardened. This was it, the perfect setting for what needed to happen. We boarded the yacht mid-morning. It was every bit as opulent as you'd expect from someone like William. Polished teak decks, gleaming white upholstery, and a staff of 3 to cater to our every whim. Lucy sat beside me as the boat pulled away from the dock, her hand resting lightly on mine. For a moment, I almost wavered. But then William appeared, his casual confidence grating against my nerves, and I remembered why I had to see this through. The morning passed in a blur of sparkling waters and laughter. Lucy seemed to loosen up as the champagne flowed, her unease giving way to something more carefree. William, as always, hovered near her, his charm in full force. I watched them from a distance, keeping my expression neutral but my mind racing. After lunch, as the group lounged on the sun deck, William approached me. "Mark, a word," he said, motioning toward the bow. I followed him, my stomach nodding. This was the moment I'd been anticipating, the one that would either expose him or send my carefully laid plan crashing down. "Everything going well?" he asked, his tone light but probing. "Couldn't be better," I replied evenly. He smiled, leaning against the railing. "I have to say, I admire your pragmatism. Most men would have let their emotions get in the way." "Pragmatism," I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue. "It's an interesting choice." William's brow furrowed slightly. "How so?" I met his gaze, my own steady. "Because it assumes there's no room for principles. For values." He chuckled, clearly amused. "Mark, in the real world, values are a luxury. We're all just playing the game, aren't we?" "That's where you're wrong," I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of weeks of suspicion and frustration. "Some of us aren't playing." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in William's eyes. He straightened slightly, his confidence faltering. "What are you saying?" I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "I know what you've been doing, William. The glances, the private conversations, the little touches. You thought you could buy your way into my marriage, that I'd look the other way for a paycheck." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "And Lucy?" I continued. "You've used her, flattered her, tempted her. But you underestimated her. And you underestimated me." William's composure cracked, his smile fading. "Mark, I think you've got the wrong idea." "Do I?" I asked, taking another step forward. "Then why don't we clear it up? Let's have this conversation in front of everyone. He raised a hand, his voice dropping. There's no need for that. Oh, I think there is, I said, turning toward the sun deck. Lucy deserves to hear the truth. The others looked up as we approached, their laughter fading at the sight of our tense expressions. Lucy's eyes widened. Mark? What's going on? I stopped in the center of the group, my gaze fixed on William. William here has something to share. Isn't that right? William hesitated, his charm replaced by a thin veneer of panic. Mark, this isn't the time or place. Then you leave me no choice, I said. Turning to Lucy, I continued, he offered me $100,000 to let him spend the weekend with you. Did you know that? The gasp from the group was audible. Lucy's face went pale, her hand flying to her mouth. What? Mark, is this true? I nodded, my voice steady. Every word. He thought I'd take the money and look the other way. But he doesn't know us, Lucy. He doesn't know what we stand for. Lucy turned to William, her eyes blazing. Tell me this isn't true. William stammered, his composure crumbling. Lucy, look, it was a misunderstanding. I was joking. Joking? Lucy's voice cracked with disbelief. You think this is funny? The others sat frozen, watching the drama unfold. William tried to recover, his tone pleading. Lucy, I respect you. I admire you. This was never about disrespecting you or your marriage. But that's exactly what you did, I said, stepping between them. You tried to buy her, William. And you thought I'd sell her to you. Silence hung heavy in the air. Lucy looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes. Mark, I didn't know. I swear. I believe you, I said, my voice softening. But this man. He doesn't deserve your loyalty or your admiration. William's face was a mask of humiliation and anger. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Finally, he turned and walked away, retreating to the lower deck. The group remained silent, the weight of what had transpired sinking in. Lucy reached for my hand, her grip tight. Mark, I'm so sorry. I squeezed her hand gently. It's not your fault. But it's over now. As the yacht turned back toward the island, the mood was somber. The trip that had promised so much had instead revealed the ugly truth about power, temptation, and loyalty. And though the storm had passed, its impact would linger. The boat docked as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the island in hues of gold and crimson. The group disembarked in silence, the vibrant energy of the weekend snuffed out by the confrontation on the yacht. William disappeared into the villa without a word, his aura of invincibility shattered. The rest of us exchanged awkward goodbyes, our plans for the evening quietly abandoned. Lucy walked beside me as we made our way to our room, her hand occasionally brushing mine but never fully connecting. I could feel the tension radiating from her, guilt, confusion, maybe even anger. But I didn't press her. Not yet. Inside the room, the silence stretched thin between us. Lucy sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Finally, she spoke. Mark. I didn't know, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't know what William was planning. I swear to you. I nodded slowly, sitting across from her. I believe you, I said. But that doesn't make this any easier. She looked up, her eyes glistening. I feel so stupid. I thought he was just being friendly. I didn't see what you saw. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault, but a part of me hesitated. There were still questions I couldn't answer, doubts that lingered despite her assurances. I need to ask you something, I said carefully. Did he ever say or do anything that made you uncomfortable? Anything you didn't tell me? Lucy hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. He was charming, she admitted. Flirty, maybe. But I thought it was harmless. I didn't think it meant anything. Her words stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. And you never thought to mention it? Not once. I didn't want to upset you, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to make something out of nothing. I stood and began pacing the room, the frustration bubbling to the surface. Lucy, he made a move on you. He offered me money for you. That's not nothing. She stood too, her own frustration sparking. I didn't know, Mark. How many times do I have to say it? I didn't know. We stared at each other, the weight of the weekend crashing down between us. Finally, I turned away, running a hand through my hair. I can't do this right now, I muttered. I need some air. I left the room without looking back, my thoughts a chaotic swirl. I walked the beach, the waves lapping at my feet, their rhythm failing to soothe my frayed nerves. How had we come to this? A few days ago, I believed in our marriage, in Lucy, in us. Now, I wasn't sure what to believe. By the time I returned, the villa was quiet. Lucy was sitting on the balcony, her silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. She turned as I entered, her expression unreadable. Mark, she said softly, we need to talk. I know, I replied, sitting across from her. But I don't know where to start. She took a deep breath, her gaze steady. I love you, Mark. I always have. But this weekend, it made me realize something. My chest tightened. What? She hesitated, then spoke with quiet resolve. I think we've been drifting apart for a long time. Maybe I didn't want to see it, but it's there. And I think you feel it too. I shook my head, refusing to accept her words. Lucy, we've had our struggles, but that doesn't mean. She held up a hand, stopping me. Please, let me finish. I let myself be charmed by William because I was missing something, Mark. Not because I don't love you, but because I felt invisible. And I know that's not fair to you, but it's the truth. Her honesty cut deeper than any lie could have. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but a part of me knew she wasn't. What are you saying? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked away, her eyes shimmering with tears. I think we need time apart. To figure out what we want, who we are. I don't want to hurt you anymore, and I don't want to keep feeling this way. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. So that's it? I asked, my voice breaking. You're giving up. She turned back to me, her expression anguished. I'm not giving up. I'm trying to save us. But her words felt hollow, and as I sat there, the reality of what was happening began to sink in. Our marriage, the life we had built together, was unraveling. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. The next morning, Lucy packed her things. She avoided my eyes as she zipped up her suitcase, her movements slow and deliberate. We left the villa in silence, the vibrant colors of the island feeling muted and cold. At the airport, she turned to me, her face etched with sorrow. I'll call you, she said. When I'm ready. I nodded, unable to speak. And then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd with a finality that left me hollow. The plane ride home was a blur, the noise of the engine drowning out the chaos in my mind. By the time I reached our empty house, the weight of it all crashed down on me. Lucy was gone. William's money sat untouched in my account, a bitter reminder of what I had lost. I sat in the dark that night, the silence of the house pressing in around me. Somewhere out there, Lucy was searching for answers. But here, in the emptiness of our home, all I could feel was the ache of her absence. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know if love would be enough.